Maxed Out Man, helping you become the man you were made to be.
Hey guys, it's Kevin Davis from the Maxed Out Man podcast. I'm here with Callahan today, which is going to be super exciting. I wanted to mention first, if you are looking to take your manhood to the next level, I don't know if that sounds right, take your manhood to the next level, but take your masculinity, whatever. This isn't one of those little pill commercials, but head over to maxedoutman.com. We've got all sorts of stuff over there, and we'd love to connect with you and help you do just that. So, hey, let me read Cal's quick bio. Cal, a retired trader, hosts the Great Unlearn podcast and runs Unlearn Ventures, an investment fund and incubator for forward-thinking projects. He lives in Austin, Texas. I was just there not too long ago. With his wife, 3 kids, 2 dogs, a cat, and his pet pig named Petunia, which is super hilarious. I love that you have a pet pig. Through the Great Unlearn podcast, Cal shares conversations with some of the world's leading experts in performance to help men and women unlearn their way into a new way of being. And I stalked you a little bit on Instagram last night, and looked at some of your podcast guests. I'm like, man, I don't know if I'm qualified to have Cal on my podcast, but this is super, super cool that he's here.
You definitely are.
And I have to tell you a funny story. I got your picture up on my computer this morning. I'm looking through your bio, and my wife kind of comes into my office, and I'm like, yeah, he's 52. He's been married for 24 years. I'm 51. I've been married for 28 years, going on 29. And she's like, what are you guys, are you like made in a lab, all these guys? Cause you're like the same, same basic haircut. We're working on our fitness. We're, all of these different things. And I'm like, I don't know, but it's fun to hang out with this guys. I've been blessed lately to really have a lot of men like you and me into my life, and it's a super huge blessing. So I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no, I think she's onto something. I think we're onto something. I think there's something happening where men like us who have had careers, and fitness is important to us, and our relationship is important to us. We're searching for something more because the career wasn't it. And when other men pop into that kind of awareness, you kind of find a tribe of men that are asking the same questions. I don't find we landing on any answers. We just it's a whole different orientation because we're so used to having the answers. And it's like calling, for me in particular, is calling me into this, like, can you just sit in the not knowing? And can you just be curious? And can that be okay? Can that be enough for you? And it's hard because there's a part of me that I've grown up with that has created a lot of success for me that is dependent upon getting a right answer. And this stuff is not, in my experience, is not about that.
No. Yeah. And it's funny because the joke I always tell, and my wife will repeat this, is like, hey, if I don't know the answer, I'll make one up. Yeah. that's like the guy code, right? Like it's totally. You're so used to having the answer. And those of us, and I'm sure most entrepreneurs kind of fall into this generalist category, which you have talents in a lot of different areas, and you kind of have this knowledge base in order, so you can do a lot of little things. That's how I'm kind of geared. Like I can do construction and work on cars and do marketing and all these different things. But the thing I have to remember is I'm not as smart as I think I am. Right. Yeah. And being around men like yourself and some of the other men I'm around, I re-engineer my brain to say, I want to learn everything I can from these other men and women, but other people in my life.
Yeah. And it is a kind of a rude awakening on the one hand, when you realize you don't know nearly as much as you think you do. When you give yourself the space to not have to know all that is the other side of it. That is a true blessing. It's just hard for us, I think, to get to that point where it's like, dude, you don't need to know everything. It's okay. Yeah. We're brought up in that system. Men and women in the school system is, I don't want to get started on that, but it's.
We homeschooled our kids, so
yeah. So our kids were homeschooled for a period of time, and then they're finally like, we kind of want to go to school with other kids. Yeah. So we did the best we could within the homeschooling, and then with what, kind of options we had after that. But I've always tried to share with my kids, like, look, this is just a game that, if you're going to go to the schools here, you just got to play the game.
Yep.
And it's not a reflection on you one way or the other, but just like give an effort, do your thing. But it's hard to, we all get indoctrinated into that system of like, there's a right answer. And the answer is not based on any of your own experience. It's based on someone else's experience or someone else's supposed experience. We don't even know. We're just taking this stuff for fact. When I've found that when I really get to speak on my own experience, that's when the truth comes out. That's when it's undeniable, because it's my experience and it's my perspective on my experience. And shifting to that has, like, when I just stay in that lane, things get a lot easier for me. I try to get a little smart, it doesn't work.
Yeah, and I like that. I used to tell the girls, my kids, I've got two that are 26 and 24, but they started out in public school and then went into homeschooling. And we used to explain, look, this is a microcosm of society and life that doesn't really exist anywhere else on the planet. Like, and that's why so many people, I think people get out of that education system and then try to apply that same microcosm, what they learned there, into real life. And it's like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. It kind of saps a lot of creativity and free thinking out of kids. And, a couple of my kids in particular, I have 3 kids, a couple of them, there's just not a good fit. I mean, they'll play the game, but they're meant to be artists and to create and to see things differently, and for that to be honored and to not, I mean, listen, I grew up, I was really good at math, and I would write everything down and I would do the problem out. When one of my kids, he's like, I don't understand why, like, I don't need to do that. I know the answer. And most of the time he's right, and sometimes he's wrong. Well, I'm like, well, why would you just write it out in that way? He's just like, that's just not how I operate. He's okay not being 100% correct. And it's like, okay, that's different. But he's like,
or show your work, right? Like that.
Yeah, I'm like, why can't you just show your work? He's like, because it's stupid to do that. And it's like, you do kind of have a point, because you mostly get the right answer, and it's just like him pushing back on the system in his way, and
how do you foster that with your kids? And I want you to I'd love for you to kind of explain more of your story, going into the Unlearning, the Unlearn podcast, your Unlearn project, and all that. But kind of how do you essentially tell us that story? Because it's not something I think most people are kind of tuned into, and so maybe start there, and we can move from up.
Yeah, right out of college, I moved to Chicago and got a trading job, and I was a trader there for 18 years, from 95 until 2013. In 2013, I decided it was time for me to leave the business. I had loved it for a long time, and in the last couple of years, it just was clear that I needed to leave. I needed a different kind of path. So we moved down to Austin in 2013, and I went about on some different projects. I got involved with a pro fitness league called the National Pro Grid League, and I owned one of the teams. The league lasted 3 seasons. It was a great experience. It was fun. It was expensive, but I loved fitness. I still do. And I love the team atmosphere. I grew up playing sports. I played hockey in college. And so there was a lot that was coming together there. And it was, I would say loosely, it was like taking CrossFit into a team atmosphere, like a traditional sports league. And I was huge into CrossFit back then, so I loved that. Anyway, do that, pivot away from that after 2016. And all along, I've just invested in different projects, some real estate, a lot of CPG stuff, and other things that I'm interested in. And so that's kind of where the Unlearned Ventures piece comes. It's all my capital, but it's things, really the last 4 or 5 years has been centered on really supporting founders that I believe in and less about some cool idea or cool new product. Like I've done enough of those where a lot of times they just don't work out. And when I look back, it's the leadership at the top wasn't right. And so I've really focused on
And does that come in more to where like you
and
don't
making
really
sure that I believe in the person, no
like
matter what
it's
we're
an interesting,
selling.
yeah. I'm having a little trouble. We're got a little bit of a lag. Do you have lag on my side?
No, there was a little lag right there when you spoke up.
Yeah, I'm losing you for like 15 seconds at a time, but I think we'll keep going. I'm kind of taking note of this timestamp. And I don't know if it's on. Who knows? Technology.
Well, usually with
right?
Riverside, they're good about putting it together. So we'll just keep our
So
fingers crossed.
as long as I could still understand what you're saying, I think
I don't know about that. Whether there's a delay or not.
But you're talking about investing in these projects, and so is that something to where like if you view it like, okay, this is a pure financial venture that I'm interested in, and that's the thought process, what's my ROI versus, hey, this is something I can see myself being passionate in, is that it seems like, it's kind of a loaded question, but it seems like one would be a more fulfilling venture than the other.
I spent most of my investing time in that first bucket, and it's great when you get a big win, and when you do get a big win, it's like it's short-lived. It's like the check hits the account and then it's over. And I just had an epiphany, maybe probably 3 years ago, and I just started to realize like who I was actually investing in. It's like, oh, I'm actually being much more conscious about who I'm investing in. And I realized that relationship is generally going to be 2 to 4 to 6 to 8. It's going to be a long relationship. And so that is more important to me, that journey of like what we're building together, how I can support. I mean, I'm a passive investor in a lot of these things, but I will step in and make connections and do what I can to support the founder and, whatever we're trying to build as a brand. But I started to realize that payday is like so short. It's just like a metaphor for life. It's like, we all think if we make a certain amount of money or we do this thing, if, when this happens, then I'll feel this way. It's the same thing with investing. Think like I invest in this, if it's going to have a 5X over this many years, like that'll be great. And it's just the payday comes and it's not fulfilling. And so what am I signing up for? And I realized that when I write that check, when I'm on board, there's a part of me that is involved energetically with that project. And so that's super important, that I'm discerning about who I'm kind of giving those resources away to.
Yeah, because it's, we talk about three things: man, marriage, and mission, right? And so from a mission standpoint, that's kind of the idea, right? Like that's business, purpose, community service, helping other people. And I did a webinar with a guy named David Meltzer, who is Brian Meltzer. He's the guy that Jerry Maguire character was, and I keep wanting to call him, and it actually is David. I keep wanting to call him Brian, but it's actually David.
Okay, yeah.
But he was talking a lot about this giving aspect of everything that we can do and kind of giving back. And for you, it's helping the founders, providing some financial, obviously there's an investment component in that, but it's really this mission of how do I build other people up to help them be successful, and then in turn be successful in myself.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. And it's being of service in a certain way. And yes, there is a check that's written, so that's part of it, but it's not just about that. And I think in the past, it was more about that. And I didn't maybe recognize as much the network that I have and the people that I've created relationship and trust with. And so those relationships are really important to me. And so I won't just reach out for any kind of favor, but it'll have to be something where everybody has a nice little win in there.
Yeah. Well, he gave a phrase that he always likes to ask two questions once he kind of gets down further into these relationships with is, if I were able to do X, right? What would that thing be and how would that help you? And then so that's the giving aspect of it. And then as he gets that answer, then he will ask, would you be willing to do X for me? Okay. And those questions don't, they're not always succinctly like right together, but I think asking that question first, and I've found, and I'm, I don't run in the same level of circles that you do, but I run in similar circles in that way. But I found if you just invest in other people, no matter what they do for a living, I've never really had that like celebrity worship or like that, and I'm guessing you're the same way, but it's like, hey, this guy just happens to have a really cool job and it happens to be much more public facing than mine. Yeah. But at the end of the day, he's just trying to earn a living and have a good life and have a good family and be successful and all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't really matter. Like, how can I help? I'm sure there's a way I can help him, and if he can help me at some point, that's great too.
Yeah, I think we do as a society, and it makes sense. I mean, the celebrities, the athletes, Hollywood musicians, whatever, they're put on a pedestal, and I've been fortunate enough for a number of years to be around a lot of those people, and they're so very human. They have all the same shit in their lives that we do. It just, so I feel for them because their life is just very public. I'm out with them and I'm like, God, it's so great. Nobody knows who the fuck I am. And here I am. People are coming up wanting pictures with, this guy and that guy. And it's like, that's just gotta suck. And so if they do something out in public when they've had a few drinks or whatever, like everybody knows about it. And so, I mean, look, it's cool to hear about their experiences in that life. I mean, I totally dig that. And I really try to be intentional about just treating them so like one of the guys. Like, look, like that's all they want. They want it to be normalized. And if they don't, then we're probably not that close. Right. And that's fine. No judgment. But it's just like, I'm not going to sit here and pump your tires and tell you how great you are and like put you on a pedestal. Like I'm going to bust your balls because you're one of my buddies. And when that happens, like
I can't imagine being in a situation where every time I failed or every time something went wrong. Yeah. I used to tell my friends that are in that kind of run in different circles, I'm like, I don't really give a crap that you're famous. I just like you because you're you. Yeah. Right. Like, it's just, you just have a really cool job or whatever. But I can't imagine being in a situation where every time I failed or struggled or whatever, it was put on public display. That would be super hard.
Totally. Yeah. So we're fortunate.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, so let's talk marriage, right? Yeah. Like you've had a successful marriage for 24 years. What is it? How have you navigated that? Because I mean, if you're talking about 24 years, that was you're in the middle of living in Chicago, being trader and all those things, right? And you've made that work and moved to Austin, and kind of talk to me about how that works, struggle. Because people always ask me, it's like, well, how have you been married for almost 29 years? And like, it keeps getting better and all that. But walk me through some of that.
Man, it's been hard. It's been a journey. And there were years where everything was smooth. And then I would say since we've moved to Austin, we've probably had a few more periods where it's been tough. And I don't think it has anything to do with Austin in particular. Maybe it's that I'm not, on the trading floor working and in that rhythm, that maybe there's more space for us to really explore. Maybe it's because we're getting older, our kids are getting older. There's probably a lot of factors of why this stuff has come up. And, we've had a few times where we're just, geez, I don't know. Like, is this it? Because we'd gotten to a point of like resentment about one another, but we weren't dealing with our own shit. And I think it ultimately comes down to taking care of your kind of side of it, and then bringing, that integrated self into it. And it's hard, man. Like, we all have these patterns, and sometimes our partner pushes those buttons without them knowing. And it's a lot of this is happening in our unconscious. And it's something that it's been very, very top of mind for me lately, as things are going great with my wife. As you said, we just celebrated 24 years, and I recognize places where I still struggle. And, I'm curious enough to try to find out when that story got embedded in me as a kid, and so a lot of it for me has been just like opening up my heart. And I think there's, I've been tracking this notion that something happened where there was either some sense of abandonment, or I didn't feel like I was cared for properly. I wasn't put in someone's care that was trustworthy. I'm like in real time working this out. And I can see where that would lead to me just keeping a little bit of protection on that heart, because this person may leave, or I may not be in a safe place. And so I think it's being honest about those things and having a partner who can hold space for those things and be there for those conversations. And can you be there for their shit that they're working on, and when they're struggling, when they're stumbling, and when they're not their best self, can you show them grace? Can they show you grace? And I think my wife and I have demonstrated that we've been able to do that. And ultimately, we know that no matter what friction there is and how some things may really piss us off, there's a love there that we just, it is unique and special, and it's worth fighting for. And like I said, there have been times when it felt like we might not pull through. And I think just what helped me was just letting go of that idea that it has to pull through. And that gave, because sometimes you hold on so tight. It's like, oh, we got to make this work. And then everything feels so intense. And I think just giving it room to breathe and say, you know what, if it's best for both of us to go our separate ways after, a lot of thought and, not being impulsive, then that's what's best for both of us. But like, let's just let it breathe and see what happens. And I would say a little over a year ago, I felt like I was in that position, and I just stopped holding on so tight. And a lot of things unwound, a lot of that tension unwound.
Yeah. Sorry, I got a little bit of a lag, but I wanted to let you finish before before I talked over you. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting perspective, because I would approach it the other way, which is like, that's not really an option. Like the whole, like, we are going to be together, but it almost has the same outcome, right? For me, I have a comfort and a peace in that, because I know that if this is my option, then I need to re-engineer my thought process around that to say, okay, well, what things about myself, what things about her do I need to work through, so that then we can make it work. And we've been, like, I've done what we call tune-ups. We've been to counseling 5 or 6 times over this 29 years, and kind of talk through all those things. And it's crazy, because you're 24 into it, I'm 29 almost into it, and it's constantly evolving, right? You think, okay, well, after this amount of time, don't you kind of plane that out, right? Like if you're in a boat, you got to get up on the plane that out, and you get the trim set, and you're just kind of floating, right? It doesn't really work that way in life, and it doesn't really work that way in marriage. You're constantly figuring out new things about yourself, about your partner, about marriage and kids and family and future. We're empty nesters now, which, by the way, is the best thing ever. But we went through a time right before our kids left the house to where we were like, what the hell are we going to do with the rest of our lives? Right.
Yeah.
And then we figured out, all right, so we went to an intensive week-long counseling thing, and we both came out of that with like these epiphanies. And then it like just springboarded us into the next 50 years of our lives. And it was pretty amazing. But going back and having those discussions is super important.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think you can approach it either way, or there's probably other ways too. But for me, it was this idea that, okay, like we don't have to do this. And with that in mind, I choose you. And I think Peyton had the same realization that, okay, well, I choose you too. And to your point, if that's not an option, you figure out your own shit, because it's not an option not to. Yeah. And I think there's some element of that in what we did as well. It's like, yeah, like, am I going to walk away from this and make the same mistake with someone else? Like, 'cause I know what my shit is and it's not resolved. So yeah. Like, it's worth, working on that and seeing how that fits into this relationship.
Yeah, just from a logistic standpoint, like, do I want to really go try to do all this BS with somebody else? Like, we're just now kind of figuring out at least how to work through it, right? I can't imagine starting over at this point in my life. Like, I don't have that much energy, But yeah, and I love that idea of I choose you, because whichever path you take on the ones that we were discussing, it's like, look, this is like, I get to be married to you. I don't have to be married to you, but I get the privilege of having you as, and I always refer to my wife as my bride, because I think that helps me frame. I've got a picture right over here of my wall of her when she was about 6 years old. And I think of her as that little girl. Ooh. And that's like her heart. Like, I see that as her heart. But like, I'm seriously blessed to be able to be married to Michelle for so long, and to be able to continue to feed into that and have her feed into me.
Oh, I got a little lag there, right when you got into the good stuff. But I love this idea. I think there's something really important about this image of your wife as a 6-year-old. And that's when we're not in the kind of the right spot. It's because that hurt 6, 7, 8-year-old who something happened to. It didn't have to be anything big, but there was something, and there was a story that was imprinted, and that little kid got his hands on the steering wheel, and that's not a good thing. That's the work that I'm trying to uncover, like what happened with that little boy. And remember that these things that I act out, my wife acts out, that everybody acts out, it's something has happened that created a story in their mind that they weren't safe, or they weren't loved, or they weren't enough. All these things. I think we all have some version of that. It's like, can we uncover that, work with that, and then release that? That's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm working on.
I mean, is there a way that you go about that in particular, in terms of like how you, is it, and I had a note here on something I picked up on that you had talked through, which is gratitude versus victimhood. And that wasn't your exact words, but it was kind of something that I saw in one of your posts. And so I'm curious how you're trying to get through some of those things because what's funny is I went back to Oklahoma, which I'm from Oklahoma and Texas also, but I went back to Oklahoma for a funeral, and I start hearing these stories about myself. And I knew some of these stories when I was 7 years old, and I kind of raised myself at that time and all that. But I start hearing these stories, and I'm like, well, that makes sense why I have this particular thought process, right? Like, my dad starts telling me stories about how he kidnapped me from my mom, and then she found me and kidnapped me back, and like all this wild crap, right? And so it's like, all right, well, that makes sense why I would be designed, why I would work the way that I do, right? But how are you working through some of that stuff?
Definitely through meditation and just letting letting those things come up and just sit with them. And it's been over the past week, in fact, that a lot of this stuff has come up for me. And it's because I put my attention on it. It's really like, I feel like that's the next thing for me in my personal development and growth, is to work on these things and uncover them. And again, I've started to, the more I sit in meditation, more things come up, and they don't all mean something, but there's so many images of my childhood that frankly, I don't have a lot of memories of it. Part of it, I think I'm 52 and I don't have a great memory anymore. But when I sit in that meditation, I'm surprised that I'm able to go back to some certain, scenarios. And I know enough that my memory of it is not going to be clear. I'll have a general picture. I will know how I felt about it. Now, what happened and how I feel, what happened actually doesn't matter. It's what I took from it. So I guess that's the important part, even though I can't remember it, with any real accuracy. But I think it's just like, it comes back to just owning that stuff, owning that part of you. So really that's where it's like that accountability of, look, this is my shit, whether I deserve to have it or not, that doesn't matter. This is what I'm bringing to the relationship or any relationship. And so what am I willing to do about it? And with that accountability, again, I think it's important to give yourself grace. It's like, dude, you were fucking 7 years old and it's okay. We forget that. Like, oh, I wish I was better. I wish I didn't react this way when this happened. And it's like, okay, well, you do. And let's get curious about why you do. Because when we do that, we get to look at what created that pattern. And so I think it's like being curious, being accountable. Don't be putting your shit on other people. Like they have their own shit. Just take care of yours. And I think when I've done that, it's really empowering, because I can work with that. If someone else is doing something to me that's affecting me, that's out of my control. And then I'm kind of fucked.
Right. Yeah. 100%. That self-discovery is so important, I think. And I'm not really like a woo-woo guy or anything like that, but it's funny to have some of these stories. And my wife was going crazy because she's like, your dad tells this story as if he's ordering lunch, right? Like, and he's like, so then I picked you up for your weekend and I never took you home. And then you stayed with us and we moved. And then like 5 months later, your mom found you, 5 months later, she found you because your picture was in the paper. And like, my wife is freaking out because he's telling this story as if it was like no big deal. And she's like, were cops involved? How did this happen? And I have to your point about your childhood stuff, I have no memory of this in any way. And so that's kind of this wild story. I don't have any memory of it, but I mean, I'm just trusting that it actually happened, I guess.
Well, how old were you when it happened?
Probably 7 or 8. Going into that second grade ish. So it actually happened. They had taken a picture of me enrolling in second grade, and it was in the local newspaper. And this was a different town than we moved to this town. And somehow my mother found that picture, and then that's how she knew where I was. So it's a super weird story.
But there's, this is not my world as far as like studying it, but like there's enough there where you don't have memories of it, which is interesting, right? Like it wasn't like you were 18 months old, you were second grade. It's like it's interesting, like what happened to that memory of, I mean, it's a pretty interesting time. I don't want to say it's traumatic or anything, because I don't want to even suggest that that's what happened for you. But it's interesting that on the one hand, your dad totally normalizes it. And maybe it was like all that was going on, but for you didn't sense any of it. You were just with your dad for 6 extra months. but yeah, you never know. There could be something there. There could not be anything there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how all that works. And I've heard the memory described as, and this will date both of us, but the card catalog, right? Like a memory is like your memory is kind of a card catalog, and
Yeah.
and your brain can like reach back and pick things up and bring things out of that. And so maybe mine's just some of those memories just end up way back in the card catalog, and we don't need to pull those out necessarily, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot, there's like a balance between being curious about, our childhood and making meaning out of stuff that didn't necessarily mean anything. And so I think there's also, kind of striking that balance is important as we investigate our own, kind of upbringing, and let alone someone else's. That's for them to be curious about,
Yeah, because I think it's important to not use those things as anchors in a bad way, like the anchor that holds us back, versus like, hey, this is something that happened, and I don't need to, because I think that's the tendency, right? Is to focus on that and to like wrap your life around something bad that happened, versus like, all right, this was an event. I'm acknowledging it. I know I worked through it, but it doesn't really affect me or doesn't have to affect me right now.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that, of like really taking the charge out of what happened, and yeah, like really being able to work with it. And I think there's a skill in that. And I think it's real easy to say, well, this happened to me, so that's why I'm a little fucked up. And, right?
And I think we all are, right? Like there's no question, right?
The more I investigate my own life, it's like, whoa, like that's fucked up. And the more I talk to people, it's like they've had all kinds of stuff happen. And it's like we all have, again, those stories that get imprinted and we react in a way. And it just, in those first 7-8 years of our life, that's where a lot of that stuff happens. That is, boom, kind of set into our psyche. And then I think it's for us to decide what is serving us and what is no longer serving us.
Yeah, that's super important to see. Like, okay, well, this is what I can use to move myself forward, and these are the things that I need to kind of, it's like stuff that you own that you don't need anymore, right? It's like, okay, well, I'm gonna take that to Goodwill or whatever and get rid of that, versus like, all right, I'm gonna hold on to this t-shirt from 1984 that I will probably never wear again, but I really like it. It's sometimes we choose poorly on those paths, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I want to ask you a couple of pointed questions, which is I've got a sign over the back here that says "Success Redefined" over my shoulder, and I think for a guy like you, who represents to me someone that has achieved and continues to work on having success in all the areas that I would define success as. Also, and some of us have more marital success or relationship success or spiritual success or financial success or whatever. But I'm curious how you would define success. If someone said, hey, what does success look like to you? I'd love to hear that answer.
Yeah, I think that, like, when I think of success, I think of freedom. And I think a lot of it is freedom of choice and time. And, a lot of times we're taught that success is how much money you've made and if you've had an exit and all that. And I've been there, and I know plenty of people who are there and have had that success. And I don't see the balance of that time and energy and that freedom. There's still like hard charging driving. And I've come in and out of that, through my life, particularly in the last couple of years, where I felt like I had a good handle on it and I was making my own decisions and spending the time with the people and doing, on the things I wanted to. And then slowly but surely it kind of crept into this old, like, that old success thing. And like, let's go, let's create, let's make money. And it's not that I don't want to do those things, but it was driving a little bit harder than I was comfortable with. And with that, for me, comes this idea that it's never enough. And, I go from an abundant mindset to a scarcity mindset. And it's like, just keep trying to build whatever I'm building, the empire, whatever you want to call it. And, have more things for my family. And it just, it's like when I can just look at, the success I've had in that world, the financial world, and just appreciate it and say, okay, you did it, and just like own that and just let it be what it is. And then follow whatever I'm inspired with from there. And yeah, there will be some money making component to it for sure. And there'll be times when I'll be super focused on it. But it's like when it's just taking up a lot of mental space for me, when I didn't feel like that was appropriate. And so I really think, there's this idea of freedom and connection. I mean, for me, it's, whether it's with my wife, my kids, mine are a little bit younger than yours, 21, 18, and almost 17. That's super important to me. And then obviously my friends, and how I show up for them, just being, success is like being fully being me. What does that look like? Am I being the authentic version of myself? Am I okay with that version of myself? Or am I trying to play it a little differently in front of different people? And there's probably some element to that. But what would it mean if I were just me and I didn't care what other people thought? There's like an integrity there that I try to orient towards. And I know when it's not there. It feels sticky, feels this weird. Like, okay, what's going on where you don't feel like you can just be yourself? You got to put on some mask and be somebody else. So that's like something that's, again, it's coming up for me lately, like really, really trying to walk that path. Because it's easy. Because there's no there's no one else to be but yourself. And I love what my buddy always says this. He's like, Cal, be yourself. Everyone else is taken. And he doesn't say it like I'm not being myself, but he just is like his little quippy line that's like, he's fucking right. Like, just be yourself. Everyone else is taken.
That's the problem with trying to be someone else, is like, I have a hard enough time trying to be myself and then try to rewrap that into someone else, especially people that I deal with imposter syndrome and some of that kind of stuff, right? Because, sure. but then I have to remind myself that, hey, this is who I am, right? I bring something to the world that no one else brings, right? You can bring something to the world that no one else brings. And by being yourself versus trying to put that mask on and trying to act like someone else or act like someone who the world will love, accept, and value and all of that.
Yeah, that's the dance. It's like being of value, but being of value through who you are and pushing who that is, right? Like, maybe I can make that happen, but it's like, where's that coming from? Is it coming because I want to be accepted, or because I really want to be of service and I think I can do that for you? It's a dance.
100%. Yeah, that I like that idea of having it as a dance, because the dance is like, back and forth and leading and following and this different moves. And I'm not a very good dancer, so maybe that's why I struggle with life.
That resonates.
Yeah, for sure. Well, hey man, I really appreciate you coming on board. I want to be respectful of your time. If people want to learn more about you and the podcast and everything else that you've got going on, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best way is, on Instagram is cal.callahan, and my website, thegreatunlearn.com, has kind of all the podcast stuff. It's on The Great Unlearn's on every, podcast platform there is. So yeah, reach out, say hi. Tell me how you're doing.
Awesome. Thanks, Cal. I appreciate you, man.
All right. Thanks, Kevin.
If you're looking to really maximize your life and become the man you were made to be, head over to maxedoutman.com and get your journey started today.